Good afternoon, everybody. Please confirm that you can hear me. Amazing. We are going to make a start now, and we still have a couple of people joining in and admitting people. Just to start, I would ask everyone if you could please share in the chat where you're joining from so we can get to know you. If you can just use the chat to tell us who you are and where you're joining from. My name is Oluwabusola Fadipe. I'm the founder and executive director of Infra-Spotlight, a civic organization raising awareness and advocating to close the infrastructure gap in Africa. It's really my pleasure to welcome you all to today's workshop, proudly supported by the AfCFTA Dialogues. So we're really pleased to meet you all. And as we just start, I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time to join in today and being part of this workshop. But before we dive into our first presentation, I want to set some housekeeping rules to make the best of this workshop today. So just to start, I'll kindly ask everyone to please mute their microphone to avoid any background noise and distractions. So if you're not speaking, I'll ask that you please mute your microphone unless you're, asking a question when it's time for questions or participating in discussions. Also like to ask us to keep our camera on if possible. This would help us to create an interactive and engaging atmosphere. So where possible, you can please keep your camera on, or you can turn it off if you're unable to. Also, you're encouraged to use the chat function. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat function to type your questions, and the team moderating this would address your question during the designated Q&A session. If you would like to ask any question, please raise your hand to speak using the raise hand function, and you'll be called on to ask your question or to speak. Also, please, we encourage everyone to keep a respectful atmosphere. So please be respectful to the speakers, to the facilitators, and to your fellow participants. To listen actively, keep the conversations constructive and on the topic. Last but not the least, you would have received the agenda and case study in your email. If you haven't received this, please check your inbox or your spam folder, as you would have that already. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker this morning, Nozipo. So I'm just going to read my bio very quickly and then hand over to her to start the first presentation. All right, so yeah, sorry, I'm just taking some time to bring up to get our bio up. Yes. Okay, so Nozipo was born in Soweto, South Africa, and shaped by global academic and professional experiences. Nozipo is a trade analyst at the UNDP Regional Center, Service Center for Africa. She leads strategic initiatives that empower micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, MSMEs, particularly women and youth-led businesses, through the AfCFTA, advancing inclusive and sustainable trade across the continent. With a background in econometrics and international political economy, Nozipo brings a rare blend of analytical depth and strategic vision. Her career spans the private sector, where she focused on innovation and value creation at First National Bank, to high-level engagement across multilateral platforms. Nozipo is passionate about inclusive financing as a catalyst for economic transformation, whether decoding trade policy or shaping regional integration efforts. She is committed to unlocking Africa's full potential, one strategy at a time. Please, can we give it up for Nozipo? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Sure. Let me just fly to my presentation. Are you able to see the presentation in full view? Okay, great. Thank you very much for that introduction. Like I've been introduced, my name is Nozipotope, and I'm so delighted to be with you guys here today as we continue having these dialogues that essentially will inform how we actually construct the Africa that we want. So I think this is actually such an honor to be part of this initiative and have the platform to engage you guys this morning for some and this afternoon for others and evening. So greetings to you all. So my overview of the presentation, I think you guys have received the agenda, so I wouldn't have to go through that. But what we'll go through slightly in this presentation is the infrastructure gap in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We'll also look at the agreement's provisions and trade facilitation enablers. And then we'll go into private sector as a driver for infrastructure solutions. And then lastly, we'll touch on the way forward, synergies that we can explore, what investment opportunities can we look into, and action, or what rather I would refer to as our recommendations. I'd like to invite you guys to please stop me as I go along if you have any questions. I usually don't like leaving the questions for the end of the presentation because I feel like I'm speaking by myself throughout, and believe it or not, I actually don't like the sound of my own voice. So moving right along. To my first slide. So let me take you through a bit of a journey, is what we're going to be doing actually throughout this presentation. Imagine a trader by the name of Sarah, a lady from Sierra Leone trying to make a living for her family. But now the challenge is Sarah wants to move her goods from Sierra Leone to Kenya. Despite the promise that is AfCFTA to provide tariff-free trade, it still remains that the barriers for her are not policy, but the real barriers that she faces are potholes, are power cuts that interrupt her production, are paperwork that are lengthy and tedious, be it at customs, be it at application, the lack of knowledge, and rather the lack of access to the knowledge that is needed for her to access funding, market, and partners in order for her to partner with and expand her business. So she faces unreliable road networks as she tries to move her goods from Sierra Leone to Kenya, limited access to logistics, and not to mention the costly price of her getting her product from Sierra Leone to Kenya. So we all know Africa faces an infrastructure financing gap of over 100 billion USD, and only 40% of our roads are paved in Africa. I come from South Africa. We have a power cut problem that we've now labeled load shedding. And in the previous days, I actually did a study on what power cuts do to the GDP and the growth of the economy. We've seen how this has impacted particularly the small businesses within the communities. It infringes on their ability to produce, to be persistent in providing the capacities that they need to if they are producing and supplying to large enterprises. So that fragments also our supply value chains as people are trying to grow their small businesses. So I think this tells us something very important, right? While the AfCFTA is this bold policy framework, a huge portion of its success depends on how quickly we can build the infrastructure to make it more functional, more efficient, and more inclusive. So as we move on, we ask ourselves, and I think it's always important to ask ourselves these questions. I mean, at the end of the day, we are the builders of these policies. We are going to be the beneficiaries, be it us or the people that come after us, right? So what does AfCFTA offer? You know, what is it really about? And to the question of infrastructure, can our infrastructure keep up with what the AfCFTA sets out, right? I mean, it sets out an ambitious agenda, AfCFTA that is, removing tariffs. It also tackles non-tariff barriers, actually, tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. It actually also provides us the opportunity of enabling value chains that stretch across the continent. And I say this because we have programs that are dedicated to ensuring that we strengthen regional value chain, taking them through rigorous capacity building projects, not just the one step in, we have this big function that takes them through a phased approach to make sure that they're able to supply to these people at the capacity that these large enterprises require them to. But then again, we have these instruments, which include the e-tariff book, the non-tariff barriers reporting mechanisms, and the digital trade protocol, which is to facilitate how we can easily trade amongst ourselves. The question still remains, do we have the facility? And are these solutions that we also come up with appropriate for the infrastructure that we have in Africa? So these tools are created to are designed to make trade easier, faster, and more transparent, right? But all of these depend on having the right infrastructure in place, be it efficient ports, be it digitized custom systems, be it energy for production and manufacturing, and seamless transport corridors. So I think without trade-ready infrastructure, the rules of AfCFTA remain a promise. On paper, infrastructure is not just a side issue. I think it's the foundation on which the AfCFTA must stand. So we go into what are the solutions, having noted Sarah's problem from Sierra Leone, not being able to move her goods from her country to Kenya. What are the solutions as you think at the back of your mind? What are the recommendations that we could eventually get to as we progress in this conversation that you and I are having? Please, like I said, feel free to come in as I'm going along my presentation. I just ask Sola to please indicate if there are any questions on, because I don't think I can see hands from my side. So we ask ourselves, what is the role of private sector? Excuse me, and how can we unlock private capital, and innovation for trade infrastructure? I think this is where the private sector comes in, not just as users of trade infrastructure, but as builders and innovators. And I think one thing that we can all reference, and in conversations that have been had around the AfCFTA, is that from the onset, as the agreement was being established, the private sector was left behind. So I think it's imperative for us to make sure that we journey with them, as not building the infrastructure for them, but with them, that they will also benefit from. So from logistic companies investing in warehousing and cross-border tracking fleets, to fintech firms streamlining payments. I mean, we've seen some of e-payments working very well in countries like Kenya. We have M-Pesa. So do we think M-Pesa could be something, a prototype that could be duplicated to work across the continent to help with the ease of payment? I think the largest problem that we still interact with till this day is that we have this agreement that allows us to have this one African market. However, you get to a B2B engagement, and I want to buy goods from a lady from Sierra Leone. What currency do I purchase in? Do I have an e-commerce service or financial service that allows me to settle the payment, be it in their currency or in my currency? Do I then have to employ a different currency to ensure that I'm able to settle that, which ends up making the good even more expensive? So I think the payment one is one that is also very pertinent, and we need to think about how do we go about it. So the private sector is already finding ways to connect fragmented markets. I mean, we've seen the successful models, the Maputo corridor between South Africa and Mozambique. We've seen work being done around special economic zones. And we've also seen African platforms like PAPS, the Pan-African Payment System. We've also seen the platform like Mansa, which allows for financial due diligence when you're trying to do financial transactions that are not necessarily within your region. But I think more can be done. You might agree with me. I think government must unlock blended financing. They also need to reduce investment risk and create a regulatory space for infrastructure focused PPP, for public-private partnerships. So that will allow for us to have a blended financing structure. I think infrastructure development should also be a shared responsibility, driven by private sector, enabled by the state, and supported by regional and global institutions. So I actually come on to my second last slide, which says, we're building tomorrow's trade infrastructure today, right? And I think the question that is pertinent to ask ourselves again is, so what is next? We've identified the problem. We've identified the gap. How do we formulate the bridge in between to make this AfCFTA work for us, given the appropriate and functional infrastructure? So first, I think we need to coordinate action. The FCA Secretariat, UNDP, NEPID, and the regional economic zones and national government must align infrastructure priorities with trade objectives. And I think this can easily be done by starting within the regional economic communities, because what you find is that there's also an overlap in members, and this, if harmonized within the particular regions, can be scaled up and come to a point where we all are harmonized and working off of the same standards, right? Second, I think private sector needs incentives. It needs land access tax, it needs benefits. Policy predictability is also important, to invest in roads, to invest in ports, energy grids, and digital platforms. I think the hesitance also from private sector is to invest in a place where policy can just be disrupted and they no longer holding what was initially theirs from the initial agreement, right? And I think third, infrastructure must be inclusive. And most importantly, actually, for me personally, it must be inclusive in the sense that MSMEs, women-led businesses, and youth entrepreneurs must also be connected, not only physically, but digitally to new markets. And hence my previous questions is, as we develop this infrastructure that we seek to enable this AfCFTA environment, are the solutions appropriate for the trader on the ground? So I move on to what I think would be suitable recommendations around trade and infrastructure. I think policy alignment is very important. I think we need to get to a point of understanding that accelerating Africa's trade integration requires bold investment strategies targeted at policy alignment, right? I also believe by harmonizing national and regional policies, governments can create an enabling environment that really attracts the private sector to fund and unlock innovations in trade infrastructure. We need strategic investment in transport corridors, logistic hubs, and digital systems that will modernize infrastructure to reduce costs. And I think these are already available to us. So it's for us to understand, how do we scale these up? How do we go back to the drawing board and understand what is working and what is not working, and how that could be better brought out to the market in order for it to be functional to allow us to trade cross-border and beyond. I also think measurable improvements such as reduced transit time, increased private capital flows, and extended market access can be achieved within a short period of time if we're able to organize our house properly, and our house being Africa. So if there isn't a harmonization and understanding that will start from national level and build onto regional level, it would be easier to implement trade across, limiting some of these non-tariff barriers. So I think to succeed, we need to coordinate our efforts as policymakers, as development partners, as private sector is very critical. With the right strategies in place, I believe Africa can fast track inclusive growth and competitiveness under the AfCFTA. After all, it is the biggest market in the world. So that would be me for today. Thank you very much for giving me your ear, and I will welcome any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Nozipo. I don't know if we have any questions. Please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat function. We have like a few more minutes, so please do ask any question. I have a question that I would like to ask.
Oh, sure.
With the AfCFTA framework, would you say that there is enough attention or like enough provision for infrastructure development itself within that policy framework?
Can I pose that question back to you? Do you think we want the provision? And I say this because I think we need to also move away from the reliance of aid or foreign investment to seeing how we can actually, with this trade regime that we have, stabilize our economies in the way that we don't have reliance in terms of regional value chains. If our economies are really strengthened, there wouldn't be a reliance and we'd be able to bounce back so much quicker from these external factors or external shocks that happen. For instance, if we had a more stable economy and during a black swan event like COVID, if we really had what we had in place, which is a strong economy that has no such a huge, and maybe it's unfortunate that I also didn't show the graph initially as I started of how much it is that we import of what we already have, you know. So how do we now get to a point where we really stimulate this intra-African trade to create stronger regional value chains that even if there is a provision, I can take it on my terms?
Absolutely. No, thank you. Asan, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the lecture. That was really interesting.
Lecture.
And
I wasn't intending for it to be a lecture.
yeah, but I mean, it was interesting. While you were discussing around it, I was thinking about it in also the international way of looking at how economics come together to then form some sort of hegemony. Do you think one of the reasons why we have not been able to improve in terms of infrastructures in Africa is because we have not looked at ourselves in a tiered manner? For example, the three largest economy on the continent, the 20 largest economy on the continent, to then create some sort of like collaboration that then means that if we are to make it work, we have to then work with others. For example, look at the three largest economy on the continent includes Nigeria, South Africa, and if I'm not mistaken, Ethiopia. I'm not sure. Now, if those three have to work together on certain things, because of the distance barrier between them, it means they have to then work with, Nigeria has to work with, let's look at Cameroon, DRC, Congo, Angola, Namibia, and before we get to South Africa. Do you understand? Like, because if you want to create infrastructures, some of those things are needed. If you want to work with Ethiopia, you then have to, cover those countries and everything like that. Is that one of the reasons that, we've not been able to create some level of change? And again, one last question, just it's two tiers. Do you think that also the lack of competition amongst African countries is also like one of the key reasons why infrastructure is lacking in the continent? Because again, I mean, beyond military takeovers across the continent, we generally get along on the continent. Like countries get along. I mean, there is no like sort of like fierce competition, oh, Nigeria has this thousands of kilometers of roads, so South Africa wants to beat it. South Africa has, this number of infrastructures, millions of kilometers of rail, so Nigeria wants to beat it. We don't have all those things. We all just go to Addis every year and then sing Kumbaya and then come back. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Hassan, help me understand your first question, please. I captured the second one, but I'm not sure I understood the first question properly. So you indicated the large economies that exist. However, is Hassan still here? Are you able
I'm
to hear
still
me?
here. I'm still here. Sorry, my video is having a bit of issues.
It's okay. So help me understand your first question.
So let's look at it from the world view. The largest economies around the world are domiciled in, with the exception of India, they are domiciled India, China, they are, maybe Japan, they are domiciled in America and Europe. So which
Yes.
means a lot of things can work together. So you
Yes.
can look at the integration. I mean, with the exception of the advent of Donald Trump, you can see the integration of US and the Canadian economy.
Yes.
It's so intertwined in such a way that it works because again they do understand themselves as developed economies and everything like that. They are part of the G7, the G20 and everything like that. Do you think if we consider having like a quote and unquote A3, A5 in the continent, like Africa's top five, and then start, working together, that then helps because again, if you then want to say, and again, the way I'm thinking about it in my head, for example, you want to do a rail from Abuja to Joburg, you have to cross several countries. You want to do
Yes.
a rail from Abuja to Addis, you want to do a rail from Addis to Joburg. Like, let's say we just want to connect those three countries. It means we have to drag other people in. And I'm saying, is it the lack of that particular vision to say, yes, we are the three leading economies in the world, in the continent, and then, trying to then use that to then, spread that tentacles across the continent.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think I have a better understanding of what you're alluding to. So I think we firstly need to look into the large economies that you speak to outside of the continent. We need to look at the consumer patterns and who are the largest consumers in that economy, right? And then secondly, I think the efforts of the AfCFTA is striving to do exactly what you alluded to, organizing ourselves to say, we've realized or we've come to the realization that we have all that we need. How do we organize ourselves in a manner that what we have works for ourselves, right? But we get to a point where we realize, like you said, I mean, South Africa might have the infrastructure, but DRC might not have the infrastructure. Nigeria might not have the infrastructure. Ethiopia might not have the infrastructure. Egypt might have the infrastructure. So I think we're at a point of realizing through what we are trying to roll out as a continent, what we had left behind as maybe something for private sector, for instance, to take care of. And I think we're now realizing even more the importance of infrastructure development, seeing how rapidly other economies have developed due to that infrastructure development, but also coming back to the importance of looking into the country context, because that also differs. We need to remember that countries are sovereign, so we don't impose. The country in itself needs to decide, is this a priority for them? And I think one of the largest challenges has been we've signed and ratified on the AfCFTA, but is it being domesticated? Is it nationally being associated? Is the knowledge being spread? Do people know how to use it to their advantage? Do they know where to find the information? So I think we're still dealing with teething problems, but the identification of the importance of coordinating ourselves, with the understanding that we have the potentials, we have maybe limited resources, but to some end, we have the resources in a natural form that we have. How do we then use it to work for us? Using what you had mentioned as the larger markets that are outside of the continent. I hope that answers your question. And the second one, I think there is no lack of competition. I think there's a lot of competition on the continent. Maybe it's just how it's presented, And I think, to be honest with you, I for myself, think we can do better. We really can do better using some countries as examples, but we need the government to also come to the party as an enabler and the people who are the policy makers. So I think collaboration will be a huge factor as how we achieve and get to the Africa that we want. I see there's another question.
Yes. Ijidolapo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Usola. Hi, Nozipo. That was a good presentation. Thank you. I think my question is quite direct. Thinking along the lines of private sector, how can we make infrastructure investment more attractive to private sector players and actors? And that's to also consider not just African entities or private sector actors, but also non-African entities, non-African firms, non-African investors, and private sector actors. Just a bit of layer to that. So you know how private sector people from all across the world were able to leverage and are still continuously leveraging the EU as a single market. Is there a way, in your view, how we can make AfCFTA as a whole more attractive, our own regional integration ambition more attractive to foreign private sector, as well as our own local private sector? Thank you.
Please help me say your name.
Oh, so Dolapo. So like dollars and then pots, except remove the R's and the R and the S and the T. Dolapo. Perfect. Perfect.
Dolapo. Okay, Dolapo, I need you not to leave me. So, because I want to, again, pose that question to you back. Is it that we want to make this one African market attractive to the externals, or do we make it attractive for ourselves first before we make it attractive for the externals?
I think if I'm being honest, I think it has to be done simultaneously. So from my work, what I've realized is that we say there's a lot of funding on the continent that needs to be galvanized, that needs to be consolidated. But some of the things we've seen so far is also, I don't know if to call it unwillingness or just the lack of, I don't know, the trust, the transparency, all of that. And everyone saying, oh, there's a need for my money to be used in my country first before we take it out there, right? And then we see a lot of the funding all over the world as well. So this is not an aid perspective. This is how do you invest, and then the ROI is obvious upfront, right? How do we even alert the world of saying, in fact, how do we alert someone in Kenya, which we've been doing? So a bit of background. I'm a trade facilitator. I own a company called Trade Flow Africa. We do some of this work. And then some of the things we've seen so far is, for instance, in tourism sector, we've been working with the Federal Ministry in Nigeria. And then the exposure is such that we're saying, oh, Kenya has a lot when it comes to tourism. They have a structured tourism sector. It contributes amazingly to the GDP. South Africa does, Egypt does, Morocco does, but Kenya has a more structured approach that we can also learn from. And then so what we're saying is that how do we attract the Kenyans? How do we first go learn from them? Then how do we attract the Kenyan private sector to say, come and invest in Nigeria, for instance? We have the resources in terms of like the land space, the natural resources for that could be fantastic for domestic tourism. But then if you convince a local, but what we've realized is that it's harder to convince a local Nigerian based here, not in diaspora, to say, come and invest in tourism, domestic tourism in Nigeria. But then a Kenyan who has done it sees the opportunity. So similar to how you then find like private sector investors in the EU or just like in other markets, and then they've seen what it is to invest in public or to fill public infrastructure gaps, right? So if there is a way to convince them or to attract them into our economy in a way that to promote our regional integration, so I think that would be fantastic. So my question is still back to you, Nozipo, which is simply how do we just make it attractive, even to our own local investors, starting from there, right? And alongside, simultaneously, to the foreign entities and actors, because whether we like it or not, they will come in. I've seen examples in Kenya as well, and as well as in Nigeria. But how do we make it more attractive?
Yeah, thank you for that great question, Dolapo. I think my answers are simple to your complex question. There's a big lack of trust on the continent, and not only nationally, but it also escalates to the regional context. And I say this because particularly from my stance, being from South Africa, we have the greatest policies outlined. However, the issue becomes the implementation. When money is allocated to go to particular places, we have people who play stomach politics, who will preserve it for themselves and not allocate it to where it's supposed to be. So I think there is a huge lack of trust, be it in the leaders that we have. I think in this particular case, I can say that our institutions and privatized institutions is what has held the country together, for now. And we hope it will continue, because then there's accountability when it comes to that aspect. There's transparency, but this is not the case everywhere, So my short answer to your question is that we need to be governed better. And that will differ from country to country. People also need to be incentivized in order for them to be willing to part ways with their money. Particularly if you're saying, I'm not just investing in my country, I'm going to invest elsewhere where I'm unable to invest in my country initially, So the lack of trust and security then also creates the inability for me to invest in something that I see will then later reap greater fruit. So I think we need to go back to the question of, are there institutions that we think will be able to implement on our behalf, that we actually trust and will do the job? And like I say, we as human resource capital in the continent, we have the greatest human capital. We write the greatest policies. But when it comes to implementation, yeah.
Thank you so much, Nazipo. I'm really sorry that we can't take further questions for now. We will take the remaining questions afterwards, so we can go into the breakout room now. Just to quickly introduce, there are now 3 breakout rooms, and we have facilitators who will be in these breakout rooms. You would have received the case study to work on in this breakout room. I'm going to just drop it in the chat in case you haven't read it, and your facilitators will be with you now. So I guess we can open up the breakout room and have everyone join in. Hi, everyone. I appreciate that the time was probably short for all of the discussion, but welcome back to the main room. I'll hand over to Alice to just take us through the case study.
Hello, good afternoon from Nigeria. How are we doing? Please, if you can hear me, I would love it if we reacted. I'd like to see your reactions. Okay, just Busola. So I would like us to give the summary of what we did in our respective breakout rooms. I believe there were 3 breakout rooms. So we'll start with breakout room 1. Someone from the room can give us a brief summary of what they did in their own breakout room before I go over the case study with all of us again. Breakout room 1. Said that was your breakout room and also mine. Said, would you like to give us a brief summary of everything that happened in the breakout room?
All right, thank you very much for welcoming me again. We'll talk about the breakout room and what it entails. The case study that we went through spoke about the conditions that Mr. Kizito found himself in delivering the goods to the company ABC Sweets and Co. in Lome, Togo. So I don't want to start going through all of this because we're going to still talk about this again, but we have some things to discuss. So for example, the fact that we were able to just answer just 2 questions in my own breakout room. And one of the questions that we answered successfully was that what other facilities or factors, infrastructure-wise, might have affected the trade journeys of Mr. Kizito? And we mentioned that poor vehicles was a problem, and infrastructure obviously doesn't just mean physical something. We say unreliable power supply can also be something that you could say it was a problem. And we went over to talking about what other investments or reforms could improve this corridor and other trade corridors in Nigeria. We talked about the public-private partnerships that can help to rehabilitate and maintain critical road logistics. We also mentioned, or I mentioned rather, digitalization of trade processes. I gave a scenarios that would be relatable in a sense, like if at every stage of a journey, AfCFTA or other border policies are put in place, like let's say we have this Lekki toll gate, where when you pass, you check in or you put in something. The border patrols or the people in the other country or whatever that you're passing through already know ahead of time the number of vehicles that are coming through, the number of people that they are expecting in a particular period of time. So they will not be caught unawares. It will help a lot to improve things. Now, the place that we
Thank
really
you. Okay.
yeah.
Are you
Okay,
still
sorry.
speaking?
Yes, I'll just say this. I'll just say this as the last thing. The
Okay.
last thing we talked about was what could have Kizito done differently, and I mentioned that he could have left earlier. He could have either sent the dispatch ahead of him, or he could have left earlier. He could have also engaged a reliable logistics partner, because from the case scenario, we see that this is Kizito's first time. We really can't blame him. Then the final thing that I want to say is that another thing that Kizito could have done is that he could have sought insurance coverage, hedge financial risk to protect himself in the case of something like this happening, because really it can happen to anyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sedu. Breakout room 2. Can we have someone that will give us a summary briefly of what was discussed in your breakout room? Preferably a participant, but if there's no participant, then a facilitator may do that. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I have to go.
Thank you, Adebayo.
First of all, we didn't have enough time to go through all the questions, but we did answer, 3 questions. And the first question was, what are the other infrastructure factors that affected the trade journey, between Nigeria and the destination? And we're able to realize that information gap was a major issue. There is a wide, disconnect between policymakers and people who actually work with these policies, every day, right? So, the border patrol guys might not, know anything happening, so they delayed the entire, journey. We also talked about inefficient border post designs, that might lead to congestion, from a physical, infrastructure standpoint. So the way like borders are designed can also, lead to congestions. We also talk about something as little as electricity for processing and documentation, right? Electricity as an infrastructure, can contribute to delays in journey, right? Then we talked about what kind of investment or reforms are needed to make sure that these kind of things don't happen again. Then we said upgrading of highways and bridges is important. Then we talked about creating robust digital tracking systems. And then we also talked about knowledge. Knowledge sharing and people that are frontliners, must be made aware of things like this, right? And not just it being discussed in certain rooms. It must be translated into action at, at these places, yeah. Then we talked about what Kizito could have done differently, seeing that there are several factors that that are at play here. What could he have done differently from an entrepreneur's point of view? We believe that he could have possibly partnered with a logistics company that knows about cross-border trade under AfCFTA, right? We also believe that we could have engaged, let's say, a Benin or Togo, local agents who has an understanding of how local, custom procedures are done, right? So yeah, we believed those things could have led to a better outcome for that shipment. Yeah,
Thank you
those are
very
the
much.
things we're able to, untouch in the group here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Adebayo.
You're welcome.
Breakout room 3, do you have someone from your room that would want to give us a brief summary of what was discussed, or do you want Hassan to do it?
Unfortunately, Hassan would have to do it because it was mostly a conversation between myself and Nozipo. And then we went through the case study. We talked about the difference between the hard infrastructures and soft infrastructures. Some other things that we felt Kizito should have done, like invest in maybe like storage transit, and then also like maybe he or she should have gotten proper prepared border people as per they are coming and then they need their goods to go far. And then just before we finished the conversation, we felt that one thing Kizito could have done better was to join associations, of people who are also in the same business, unions, to be able to, get updates and support in cases of issues like this. Yeah, so that was like basically the summary around what we discussed in group 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it seems that only the facilitators spoke. I would love to say I have the list of participants here. So as we continue the conversation, I will not be the only person speaking. I will be calling people to contribute to the general discussion. But if for any reason you did not read the case study before this before today's meeting or the workshop, can you just like signify with an emoji? So I might avoid calling you might. Okay, so there are no reactions. That means we all read the case study before. Yes, Dolapo is laughing. Yes, we all read the case study before coming here. So I can call on anybody to help with the other questions that we did not answer. So I noticed that most of the the 3 breakout rooms answered the first and partially the second question. Someone said she read it during the breakout session. No problem. You're up to date, Oluwapelumi. So I might also call you. Thank you very much. So the second question says, what could Kizito have done differently, if anything, to reduce the risk? you know, if you read the case scenario, it looks like, okay, it looks like he tried his best to dispatch on time. The deadline was 9th of April and he dispatched on the 29th of March. And 12 hours from Ogun State to Togo should have covered everything and made sure that his goods arrived in Togo within 24 hours, within 12 hours. That would have been the 30th of March. But unfortunately, he did not get there until days after the deadline. So one of the things that I believe is he should have dispatched earlier, though he dispatched earlier, but maybe much, much earlier. But even if he had dispatched on the day that the invoice was sent out, it's also possible that he would have still experienced these challenges because most of these challenges were beyond his control. Do we understand? Do we agree with me rather? That most of these challenges were beyond his control. So even if he had dispatched earlier, he might have still faced some of these non-trade barriers. Okay. Yes, thank you. I think we agree with that. Then another thing he could have done better, and I think maybe it was either Adebayo that mentioned it from his group, was that he should have consulted with people who are already in this line of business, because it was his first time of exporting outside Nigeria. Most of his business partners are within Nigeria. So he could have consulted with people who are not first timers or people who do this for a living. So I would like to call on someone, is it Cisse Adeni Martins, to give us one thing that he could have done better to prevent all the bad happenings that happened while he was sending his goods to Togo.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I joined late. Yeah,
Okay.
I wasn't able to go through the case study. Yeah. So, but I don't know. In essence, I think you've pretty much answered the question. Yeah, trying to get the goods shipped early enough. Since maybe the vendor has an understanding of the maybe structural inefficiency in within the region, right? So it should have shipped earlier. That's number one. And a few other contributions that other facilitators made too as well. I think I pretty much agree with everything.
Okay, thank you. Ife Teju, can you give us one thing he could have done better or done differently? Ife Teju, are you here with us? Chioma Upai. Hello. Hello, Chioma. Maybe we should have attached gifts to people that that would speak. Busola, maybe next time, anybody that speaks, we give them a gift because our participants are not encouraging. It's a workshop. We shouldn't be the only one speaking. No, you said there might be a gift, so please, Chioma, Ife, who would like to answer? Okay. I will just run through some other things that he could have done better. He could have conducted a route and risk assessment before agreeing to a strict timeline, perhaps proposing a longer delivery window. Okay, Oluwapemi wants to answer, so I'll let her go before I conclude on that question. You may unmute and speak. Oluwapelumi, you may unmute and speak.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon. Are you speaking? Okay, I can't hear her. Maybe she has network issues, so I'll just continue with this question. So I was saying that he could have conducted a route and risk assessment before agreeing to strict timelines and perhaps proposing a longer delivery window. When I read the case study, I felt that that clause was too strict, maybe because I'm a lawyer. I felt that if he had even given a lawyer to preview the documents before agreeing to deliver those goods, he would not have been in a tight schedule. And even if all these things had happened, the lawyer would have advised him to ask for certain flexibilities if the reason why the goods are not delivered within the time frame are things beyond his own control. So as exporters, as business people, we should always consult legal practitioners. I know that you say they will charge for just looking at your documents, but it's always better than getting yourself involved in things like this. And another thing he could have done is some form of insurance. You are shipping a lot of goods out of your country, and I believe that those goods were in millions. I don't know. I believe they were so expensive. The least he could have done was to insure those goods. Now, the losses are all on him, not on any insurance company. Thank you very much. I will still call people. We still have some questions that we have not yet answered. So now this is a general question. Whether you read the case study or not, it says, how can MSMEs better prepare for cross-border trade, especially when they are first-time exporters? Let me look for somebody to call. I will not wait for you to raise up your hand. Hello, Kayode Olude.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello, please can you answer? I would love to hear your voice and your opinions. How can MSMEs better prepare for cross-border trade, especially first-time exporters? Thank you.
Okay, I think you've mentioned some of them, which includes like, getting adequate insurance and also getting the contracts, extending the timeline for completion for the contracts, basically. And yeah, I think those two things, which were part of the things you've mentioned, I think those are things I think first-time exporters can focus on. Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody that would like to speak? I can see Ololade Oriola raising up their hand. Would you like to unmute and speak?
Hello, everyone. Good
Hello.
afternoon. Yes, speaking from Lagos, Nigeria. Right. So I'm not so familiar with exporting and importing, right? But I have knowledge on business, and what I would say as an advice, that was your question, advice to a first-time exporter, right? Hello? Yes, would be to before you embark on any exporting deal, I believe that you should map out your risk, the risk available, map out the environment, right? Map out the environment, the possible countries or communities that you're exporting to. In this case, countries that you would likely export to. Map out the laws that guard their importing let's say strategies. Strategies would be the word. Process, yes, process. Their importing process. You would map out, and then you don't want to work in silos, because for every engagement that is inter-country, right, there will be law enforcement agencies around it. There would be laws around it, policies around it, the kind of things that are allowed in the country. So you want to be aware of this risk. You want to be aware of this provision so that you're not counting major losses like this person in the this thing that you asked us to read.
This study. Thank you very much, Ololade. So Oluwapelumi dropped her. Thank you very much. Oluwapelumi dropped her thoughts. So I'm going to try and read them out. I'm coming. Give me. Okay. She said he could have negotiated a more flexible delivery time and protected himself under a force majeure clause. Yes, thank you. Then she also said, okay.
The
For
second
me, I think they
point-
can do tests.
Yeah,
For
the
me, I
second
think they
point
can
was my other question on what first-time exporters can do.
Okay. For me, I think they can do test runs through the route to have a good knowledge of how the route looks like, then issues they may encounter to be better prepared. Thank you very much. We're almost running out of time. I don't know if Busola will give us more time. Should I go ahead or we should conclude? Like, can we take one more question?
If we
that's
can
okay
take
with
it in 5 minutes, that would be fine.
Okay, thank you for your generosity. Thank you, Busola. So one question I think we should ask is this one: how can traders hold customs and border officials accountable for unfair practices? I know that even before the AfCFTA, people that export or even import goods into their various countries always have issues. So how can we hold these officers, these officials, accountable for the actions that they perpetrate at these borders? And I'll be calling names. Hello, Rachel. Are you with us? Hello.
Hi, Alice. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I wish you'd have called me earlier.
Okay,
I
then
think
if you had something to say before now, you can briefly merge it in 1 minute with the answer you're going to give for this one.
okay, but what
Thank
came
you.
to my mind after reading the case study, especially at the point where they said they were detained for 9 days, and they said, oh, like incomplete documents and all that, and I'm thinking of maybe the communication barrier, so perhaps maybe language. Yeah, I think that would have been one major issue. So if I think somebody had mentioned it before, but if they had some form of collaboration with some companies in Lome or something, so that they can keep that, perhaps the communication would be better, and maybe they would have resolved their issue a lot earlier. Yeah, I think that's one way. And for the other question, like the question you just asked, I don't know. I think I would say if there are policies related to I'm trying to look for the question again. Accountable.
How can we
Yeah, so
hold customs and border officials
border
accountable for
officials
unfair
accountable.
practices?
Okay, so perhaps if there are, I don't know, maybe call centers, or something, so that if anybody has any issue, they can always call to say, oh, this is the problem I'm facing here, and these are the people here. So perhaps is there anybody you can maybe talk to, something? Yeah,
Thank you
what
very
comes
much.
to mind.
It was nice hearing from you. So I
Thank
saw
you.
Ololade's hands up. I don't know if it was a mistake because she has put them down. Or has Rachel said what you wanted to say?
No, it wasn't a mistake. I put it down because I wasn't sure if there was time for it.
No, we still have like 3 more minutes, so you can say
Okay.
something. Thank you.
Yeah. So how you can be sure to so the question is it avoiding the please can you say the question again? Because
Holding our customs and border officials accountable for unfair practices.
Okay,
How
so to
can
keep
we
them
do that?
accountable, yes, I remember now. Thank you. So in keeping them accountable, you have to first of all be aware of what the laws guiding the customs and exporting, right? The laws guiding them, you have to be aware of them. So with these laws and slash policies available, there would also be room for consequence management as well because of this sector, right? So what if you're aware, you can use that knowledge to your advantage. So if you're going to be making a case for unfair treatment or corruption, it has to be backed up by certain laws that that are already existing, or maybe precedents that are already existing as well. So being aware is very key, very major.
Thank you very much. I think Caesar sent in his own answers. He said, let me see if I can find them. Oh, I can't find them. Why can't I find them? I just saw Okay, let's see. He said education, awareness of the operations of rules of origin, similar to what Ololade just shared with us. So I'll briefly run through some other things because our 5 minutes are almost up. Other ways we can hold these officers accountable is by filing formal complaints. I don't know if you're aware of the AfCFTA NTB online reporting tool. You can find it on tradebarriers.africa. For traders, you can just go online and report all these unfair practices as they are happening, and they will monitor it. I've never used it before, but it's there, and it has been there since the start of, almost since the operational phase of the AfCFTA. So you can report as an exporter, you can report unfair trade practices on using this tool. Then another thing you can do is engage with your national AfCFTA focal points. You can't do this thing alone, you can't fight alone. If Kizito had immediately called the Nigerian AfCFTA office and said, this is what is going on, I believe that they would have stepped in, even if it's as a form of diplomacy between Nigeria and the other two countries that he had issues with while transiting to Togo. Then another thing you can do is collaborate with trade associations. They will fight for you if you are their member. If you go through anything, they are there to defend you. Then you can use social media and the press strategically, so nobody comes and says you defamed them, but use it strategically to air your issues out. Then generally, we can all advocate for transparent border monitoring. We should not just leave it to the government. We can advocate that third parties auditor what happens at borders. Thank you very much for a wonderful breakout session. Thank you, Busola, for having me. And for everybody that spoke, I think Busola might have a gift for you. So maybe when we are done with this, please still go over the case study. It was an interesting one. I enjoyed it, really practical. Thank you. Have a lovely evening or a lovely day wherever you are. Bye.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you very, very much. Just a quick question before you go. On the trade barriers, the complaints reporting, do you know how long it takes to get the response roughly? Do you have an idea?
I think it's between 24 hours. I'm not sure. But you know that this is Africa. We have our own technical issues. And with time, things progresses. But it should be within 24 hours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We would move straight into the next presentation now, which would be delivered by Iji Dolapo Ijiwoye, who is the founder and CEO of Trade Flow Africa. So Iji Dolapo is a trade innovation leader, and she's worked to bridge fragmented trade support systems and unlock Africa's trade potential. Our work spans across policy reform and implementation, private sector development, and SME empowerment. For this session, she will be talking around how to navigate and advocate for better infrastructure under the AfCFTA, which is a build up to everything that Alice has taken us through on how you can be export ready, and also you can advocate for yourself better under this framework. So I will kindly ask Iji Dolapo to please take the stage now and just, carry on from here. Thank you.
Hi, Busala. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to be taking a different approach, more conversational, right? Because I think we've discussed everything that I even had noted. So thank you very much, Alice, for that as well. The breakout session was also very interesting. I did not even read the case study prior, but then I'm happy that we are all here still discussing this matter. I think my one goal from this whole session would be to let everyone leave here, or it's for SMEs. I mean, we're not all SMEs. Some are practitioners, like let's say in other fields. I heard someone saying they're in business earlier. Alice is a lawyer who is also in the AfCFTA space. So, I mean, I potentially hope that everyone can leave, becoming an advocate for MSMEs in the space. So this is the way it is for me, right? I've had, as a result of the work we do at Trade Flow Africa, I personally had a lot of exposure to SMEs across borders, not just in Nigeria. And then, I mean, to be realistic, they're all the same, should I say, profile. They all have the same profile. I was in a conversation the other day with a lady in Kenya, and then she had mentioned the fact that our own organization, they're working specifically on redefining what MSMEs are, like who these people are, right? That she realized that they vary from sector to sector. And I think that's an important foundation to lay, right? To say, I mean, some people would define MSMEs as businesses that do not have up to 50 employees, right? Some other people would say, MSMEs are folks who would probably do not earn a certain amount of revenue, right? They do not generate a certain amount of revenue. Some people would say, they probably only existed for a few years. I mean, we all have these different definitions, right, for MSMEs. But when it comes to trade, I think because trade is very all encompassing, if we can say that, right? So I think it's very important for us to then begin to think about MSMEs based on the sectors that they find themselves in. The lady in Kenya had made an example, and she had said that an MSME was it a farmer she mentioned, she particularly mentioned a commodity type and said, I mean, that person earns more, that even as a group, they earn way more, and individuals, they earn way more than even the formalized companies, right? And that this was a surprise to them. And so that brought them back to thinking around, how do they approach trade finance? How do they approach even compliance issues, right? And then so this same MSME is going to benefit from some of the policies that the government has made, particularly for MSME. So I think it's important that we live here as advocates, also thinking along the lines of not being, what's the word now? Not having a narrow mindset, or just broadening our idea of what MSMEs are. So that's the one thing I think it's important to lay foundation of, right? And then thinking about the challenges that MSMEs face. So when I first saw the topic, I smiled because I was thinking to myself that, is it when you tell people infrastructure and you put the word infrastructure in the same sentence as MSMEs, there's a bit of is this real? Does this make sense? Because everyone thinks, like, I mean, the average human being thinks infrastructure is only something massive that affects the big businesses, right? Like the Dangote group, right? Or and the likes, right? So but however, we're of the opinion, right, that if you solve infrastructural problems, right, that affect MSMEs, it will benefit the big guys as well, like the large corporations. So it's a win-win. However, if you solve infrastructural problems that affect only the big guys, you might run at a risk of not including the MSMEs, or not even solving anything for them, or even making matters worse for them. So I'll give a hypothetical example, which is, so say you're able to make it easy for air cargo, and you solve these matters, right? Especially for people who are chartering entire planes, right? To move goods from, let's say, Nigeria to say Zambia, right? And then let's say you solve all the challenges in that pipeline. One could be, maybe you want better documentation, or maybe they want speed when it comes to feedback. So that's like you're improving like the feedback loop. The situation we've seen is such that if you solve that, you're neglecting the fact that some MSMEs do not have the capacity to even charter an entire cargo plane, right, to deliver just their own goods, or even collectively. We've seen fractional shipment in the space, by the way. So fractional shipment is just basically when you bring your goods, I bring mine, you bring yours, everyone on this call will bring all our goods, similar items, to the same carrier. So they carry it all together to the destination, and then from there it's warehoused and everyone begins to take their own things. But then if you tend to think about it that way, you then realize that, back to the scenario I was making, right, which is, you realize that you could have solved the air cargo problem, and then businesses of that same size, large corporations, might never experience that again. Or just and then you then realize that you would have left out the MSMEs, particularly those two ones that are constantly moving their goods by road, right? Because you've not solved for that, right? And then if you solve, let's say, only the I think it's called the transatlantic highway, right? If you solve the problems affecting that, you then realize that there are smaller, tinier roads in between, connecting to different countries, connecting, let's say, it could even just be the Benin Togo route, or the corridor, right? So or the Lobito corridor, as it were. So there are different things, right, that we need to consider when we are addressing challenges that affect MSME. So it is very possible, and I think for anyone who does not yet know, but I think the case study has already given us that it is very possible for us to have infrastructure in the same conversation as MSMEs. So just touching on infrastructure a bit, in my breakout session with Alice and Sedo, I'd briefly addressed, and I remember Hassan also mentioning it, that soft infrastructure, this is a real thing, right? There's a lot of focus on hard infrastructure. Everyone is thinking about the tangible things. Everyone is thinking about the roads, like I've been mentioning as well. The airlines, everyone is thinking about different things that are very tangible, right? But then there are behavioral contexts to working in Africa. There are behavioral contexts to doing trade on this continent, even just across borders. Someone had mentioned earlier, and that was a very unique perspective, and it's very obvious. That's a language barrier, but it's also very unique because a lot of people in the space, they tend to understate it. They tend to underestimate the influence or the importance of what's the word now, of language. Even things as basic as time difference. You're talking to someone in Kenya or Ethiopia, they're hours ahead of you if you're in Nigeria. All those little things. And then what you would find funny, I mean, these are situations we've had to mediate, right? You introduce two traders, or a buyer on this side, a seller on the other side, and then you realize that, I mean, you expect everything to go peacefully, to go smoothly. It happens with corporates even, right? And then they keep bringing us back into those conversations to address these things over long email threads, and I'm jumping on calls, and then we're traveling, and then we're talking to these folks, and then you realize that it's as simple as just a misunderstanding of cultural context, behavioral context. And then so it is very important to also pay attention to even what would consider, everyone is talking about the lack of information or just inadequate information, access to that, the communication. And then you realize that some of these things are even artificial because they're not natural. They're things that if we take the minimum effort, we can actually address, right? So I think that it is important for us to also pay attention to soft infrastructure. Things as simple as custom behavior, the customs officers, right? I gave an example during our breakout session briefly, and I mentioned that was at Lagos Chamber of Commerce where they were celebrating, I think, ECOWAS at 50, right? And then a woman in the audience, she got up and she was very passionate. You could tell that she was in pains. And then she was talking about how when she's moving her goods from Nigeria to other African countries, even just within West Africa. And then, of course, there was a customs officer on the stage, right? It was on a panel session. And then she was attacking them, basically saying, oh, she had all her documents, but customs people were still delaying her. Oh, should she have to calculate how much she would tip them as a form of bribe, right? To our entire cost pipeline, to our entire just cost implications. And then, of course, the customs man on the stage only defended customs, right? And said he was saying, oh, he's very sure that she doesn't have all the documents. She didn't have all the documents even till now. She probably doesn't even have them. And then all of us were like, she most likely does. And then she now started listing all the documents, every single thing that she knows that is required of her. And then she was saying this wasn't even within the AfCFTA jurisdiction, right? This was just basic ECOWAS, and she was still facing these issues. And then so I had mentioned during the breakout session, I briefly said, so imagine, just as Sedu also mentioned, right, saying, oh, digitalization. Imagine there's a situation where you can actually adequately report. Maybe when she's back in Nigeria, she's like, oh, I will take it up with people. She doesn't have to say it to them, obviously, because that's something else I would address. But then it's something that she could have said, oh, even just by stating the day and the time she was moving, right? She had to move her goods. They can easily track down who is involved, who was the customs officer on ground as at that day, right? This is probably not the kind of presentation you're expecting. Because I want to draw as much as possible from real life experiences. Like I said, my mission here is to make sure that we all live advocates for SMEs, right, and MSMEs. They would not, to be honest, they're not going to advocate for themselves. They're not equipped for that, if I can say it that way, right? Not because they don't have the knowledge, not because they don't feel the pain. But I think it's on us as the much more, should I say, as people who are much more exposed to updates, right? Real-time information on AfCFTA, for us to go out there and see and learn from these people, take their pains and then contextualize it and put it into, it could be documents, it could be any form that, let's say, these are practical ways you can go about it, right? These are things we do already to say that the government can then consume. And then if you're able to then secure meetings with some stakeholders in some sectors, some, governmental stakeholders, right, in some sectors, you're then able to then take this feedback to them to say, oh, we appreciate what you've done so far, but this is what we literally have a company that is engaging us just for the sole purpose of, you have access to real-time information. How can we make our services better for the SMEs? Just provide us this information, right? So this is to say, we need to care about these MSMEs as much as if we care about implementation of the policies, right? We need to always have access to them to ask them for feedback and gather this feedback in a way that the government can then understand it. They speak different languages, to be honest. Someone had mentioned stomach infrastructure earlier. I think it was said during a breakout session. And then he had mentioned stomach infrastructure. These are real situations, right? But if you're going to talk to someone who only speaks from their stomach, and then and you're bringing information from someone who speaks from the heart, if you had to put them on the same table, they probably would be speaking totally different languages. They probably will not understand one another, not because they're not speaking English. They're probably speaking the same Swahili, the same English. But the reality is that in terms of like the understanding, it differs, right? So our own positioning is to say, how do we take information and feedback from the MSME space entirely, in different sectors, and then you take it back to the decision makers, the people who actually call the shot, the people who can actually implement things that would affect them, even in terms of infrastructure, right? So speaking of infrastructure, another practical thing, this happened in the healthcare space. So we happen to be a corporate member of an organization called the Healthcare Federation of Nigeria. They're the largest private sector body. They oversee all things, very structured, very, very, very organized, if I can use that word. So one of the things they do is that besides their normal conferences and seminars, they then privately engage, customs, for instance. I remember an event they had, and then they brought the Comptroller General of Customs, to come and speak to everyone. And then everyone was just like raising their hands, like literally trashing out all the different cases on the spot there in front of like hundreds of people, right? And then post that event, they made extra effort to make sure that they could set up a desk at the customs office, right? Just bridging that gap. So that takes me to the conversation along the lines of associations. MSMEs, if you know any MSME, if you coach any MSME, if you're a lawyer to any MSME, if you yourself you're an MSME, you're such an enterprise, you have to think about the fact that you can't do it alone, and you have to join associations. And I'll be very real with you. There are associations and then there are associations. There's associations that were born out of just grievances of what a larger association could not address, right? And then there are associations that someone just felt like, oh, there's no one representing me. Let me form an association. Let me gather other people. And then you realize that, realistically speaking, there are other people in that space, right, who have been well represented. So it's a thing of, oh, my voice is not being heard. So what we are saying is that you want to also pay attention as an MSME or someone who represents them or someone who speaks to them or someone who advises them to say, join credible associations. So for instance, if you're a manufacturer in Nigeria, especially a large manufacturer, you have almost no business with any other association apart from like Manufacturing Association of Nigeria. That's MAN. We work closely with MAN. And the one thing we realized is that they are absolutely passionate about the work they do. Just was it not 2 weeks ago, I was still with the Director General, and then you could tell from the way it was addressing matters that he's truly passionate about the work they do. We work with Kenya Association of Manufacturers too. I was in the office in Nairobi in April, very passionate about the work they do, very intentional, very direct. And they already interact with the customs. They already interact with the relevant bodies, right? They already have like the right contact in all those agencies. So it's not a thing of, oh, you go to the website, you pick up a number, then you start to call people. They're not private sector folks. They're not built the way private sector people are built. So I think that is also something we should take into consideration. So associations, you want to join credible associations who have the influence that you need. And then when you're in there, you also want to be a participating member, not just a membership fee paying member. You want to participate. These I believe these are real things we can actually do, real steps we can actually take, right? To begin to advocate. Because advocacy sometimes is not just even in writing, it's not sometimes even in speaking, is action-based, right? It's about the steps you take or you find a community of SMEs taking. chambers of commerce are very important. You can't go it alone. So I'll give an example of Kenya. That's the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce. I mean, well structured, and to an extent where they cover the entire 47 counties in Kenya. And then when they wanted to come to Nigeria for a trade mission, they engaged my company, right? They said, "Oh, you guys can do this for us." We had the bidding session, all of this went well to the glory of God. And then it was a situation whereby we then realized that what they wanted we then had to sit down to see. And then we realized that they were not just coming in the interest of just a national body, they were coming in the interest of all the 47 counties, right? So that's something we had to factor into our program design for them, right? And then what you realize is that a Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, when they have events, they have engagement directly with the presidency. So those are influential chambers of commerce, and the way and it's simply they're taken seriously at that level of the presidency because of their own internal structure, right? And the fact that it is clear that they represent the interest of the majority. And then you realize that because you're at that level, you wonder what is there that they probably don't deal with MSMEs. But because of the structure they have, so there is Lamu County, there is Kisumu, there is Nairobi County, and all the different chambers of commerce in these places, but all of them report in one form or the other in a very structured manner to KNCCI. And that's how it should be, right? So that means when they come to that level, they bring the cases and the pain points of MSMEs at the local level. So if you're an MSME in Kenya and then you happen to join your local, you happen to join your local county chamber, rest assured that your matters are getting up to the level they're supposed to get, right? And that's what you would also find in majority of other countries. And then, of course, at a more continental level, you would have a PASI, that's a Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. They also have so they liaise directly also more with like the Afrexim banks of this world, with the AFDBs of this world, with African Union, working closely with them. In fact, the headquarters sits in Ethiopia. So these are very strategic opportunities, right? So, but for SMEs and MSMEs, if we're realistically speaking, you can't have direct access to PASI. You can't have direct access to it in NASIMA in Nigeria or KNCCI or say even the Liberia Chamber of Commerce as a whole. But what you would find is that you can engage with local chambers of commerce, right? Your different states, your different localities. And then that's one of those things. So you need to have an organized front. A clear example would be, so the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, I saw a publication recently where they addressed the issue of plastics, and Lagos State government saying, oh, they are very climate friendly, or no more plastics and all. And then the Manufacturing Association is then arguing that there is a need to still allow manufacturers use plastic. And then they gave their reasons. They did their research and tabled the reasons, right? I mean, because these are matters that affect their manufacturers, their members, right? So imagine they were silent, or imagine you are not a member, and then your pain point hasn't become visible to this kind of an association that has that influence to push the media, to push where they need to push, to make sure that your voice is being heard. I mean, when they pushed the matter of the plastic, they made it really solid points along the lines of, oh, we can ensure that there are better environmental measures that are taken, better climate friendly measures that are taken by the manufacturers, but don't outrightly shut out plastics, because we still need it for this, we still need it for that. And they now also then show the impact of plastics. As much as it can be dangerous environmentally, they now show the impact of it if properly done or executed or used in any of the manufacturing processes. They now show the impact of that on the economy, the positive impact of that on the GDP. This is how to make your voices heard, right? This is how to advocate. And then, so in terms of there was something else in terms of education that I was thinking about, that we can say from the examples we're giving, creating awareness, getting the MSMEs to, or no, getting the government or anyone to really realize. I'll be honest with you, it's tricky. There's a lot of grassroots work that needs to be done. I often tell some of our business partners, and I'm saying that I think it is very important for us all to deal and approach trade matters sometimes, especially trade advocacy, as you would an election, a political election. And everyone says, huh? And I'm like, so think about it, right? A politician running for governorship or running for presidency, they have grassroots concerns. We have to run it that same way. We have to engage local players. And I'm talking about the grassroots players. You would never see a president running for an election, someone who is serious, a serious candidate. And then you go to a local government in your country, and no one knows them, no one has heard of them. And then when you realize it, if you backtrack and you sit down and you think about it, how does someone running for presidency, how does that information of one single candidate get to your how do people in your local government find out about it? How do people in your district, in your sub areas, how do they find out about it, right? And then you realize that it's a governmental play. It's a mindset, right? And it's a strategy they deploy. And so what if we did the same thing with trade advocacy, with all the positive things in this world? Not necessarily corruption enabling, right? So you want to drive policies both ways. Most people have, okay, hi Busala, I'm with you. Can anyone hear me?
Oh yes. I had a question.
Just go on.
Talking about how like MSMEs can like leverage like chambers of commerce, but I'm also thinking about the classification of SMEs. For example, like we have many SMEs in the informal sector, for example, like the average trader or like petty trader. Like, are these platforms also very sufficient for that category of SMEs? Do you get what I mean? Like, because there will be people who probably sell at a very, very small scale, like peppers, or they sell like fish in the market and things like that.
So thank you very much for that question, Busala. So I like the particular focus on even informal SMEs. I'd mentioned them earlier about how some of them even make more money in terms of revenue, right? Way more. And they have way more impact than even some of like the formal companies we deal with. And then what you realize is that my answer to you is yes, to your question is yes. You would a lot of people do not know this, and some people would know if you've happened to interact or you grew up in that kind of environment. These people are more unionized. Those market women and men, they are more unionized than even the people in fancy suits, right? Than all of us in fancy suits. They are more unionized. They are more association oriented. And then, so by virtue of those smaller organizations, you then realize that they then interact directly with like chambers of commerce. The leadership of those organizations are usually members of some of these bigger associations, right? And chambers of commerce. That's how they bring, when they are running the elections, even within just choosing the new leadership, you would see someone standing up and just talking. We were called to come and witness one recently, and then you see them beating their chest and saying, "Oh, because I'm a member of this bigger chamber, this state chamber of commerce or this national chamber of commerce, I'm able to do this and this and this for you. Or if you vote me, if you do this, like." So these are real things, right? And a good example would be Oyo State in Nigeria. So for those who are not Nigerians, there's a state called Oyo State. It's like, I think 3-4 hours drive from Lagos. There's a train connecting both. Infrastructurally speaking, that kind of train should also be cargo friendly. All I've heard so far is more people mobility, except you're carrying your things yourself, right? But I mean, purely cargo routes. That would be fantastic to see. But that's by the way. But for Busola, your question, so in Oyo State, there is the Oyo SIMA, which is like the Oyo Chamber of Commerce. But what you find is that you find Ibadan Chamber of Commerce, which is like, so Ibadan, for people who do not know, you might have come across this in research, but Ibadan is a capital city of the state, right? So similar to how you would see like say someone did it in like Nairobi, and then they mention like a major city or a major place or a major district in Nairobi. So or in South Africa, there is the old South Africa, right? And then there are the different parts, and then someone says, "Oh, I'm in Pretoria. Oh, I'm in Johannesburg." Oh, so people even locally they deal directly upwards. So that's what I was saying about implementation. It goes both ways. So someone is coming, so it's coming both from the upper part, exactly similar to how you have California, LA, that kind of thing. So you have people coming from like the policies are coming from top, right? But then there's also still like a bottom top approach as well as a top bottom approach. And then where individuals like us, where advocates like us can come in is to make sure that we stand in the gap, right? I'm sure Nozipo is very familiar with this kind of work. UNDP, they are always ensuring that they stand in the gap where stakeholders are not talking. You need to make them talk, you need to bring them to the table. It doesn't take much. So, but we start to just emphasize again, yes. So it is common practice even that local or informal sector, even to like the bottom of the pyramid in quotes, of like the market woman who probably doesn't make more than 100,000 naira in a month. That's like less than $100 in a month. Her interest is what represented. That platform, that larger platform is very useful for her. So let me even also mention this. Something like a Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, they have like state functions. So they have like state desks, right? CAM also has the same thing in Kenya, and I'm sure it's very common across board, right? So they have like state functions across the different states, across different counties, across different districts. They have like state functions, and having state function is very important, right? Because that's how they engage grassroots. So does this answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So basically, there's so many things we can discuss around this, but I just want to make sure that everyone gets the importance of us as individuals who are super educated. Let me paint a more emotional picture to you, right? Just as Musala mentioned, we have the market women. Imagine that you do not speak up for that market woman's interest. Imagine you have the capacity to, you have the ears of, let's say, someone in government, by whatever means, good means, I hope. And then you're able to then tell them to say, and then you're also like in between. So you buy something from this market woman on your street all the time, and then you keep hearing this pain point she keeps mentioning, and then you realize that it's common. It might be a bit of hard work, but there's nothing stopping you from literally capturing that pain point and communicating it ideally in a way that the decision maker would hear it, right? So think about it that if you do not capture or deliver that pain point in a way that can be adequately addressed by the decision maker that you have direct access to, that they don't, that woman's child will suffer for it, right? The next generation that's coming through that woman, or similar people with similar profiles across the continent, not just even the country, would suffer for it, right? It's an entire thing. So she probably doesn't make enough money because of that pain point, and then she's unable to probably pay rent, pay school fees, and then it comes back to bite all of us in the ass, right? Because like what we see is a situation whereby they then become the people we call, the people who then contribute to the insecurities that we face on the continent right now, across the borders and even in our localities, right? So when you think about it that way, you realize that you have no choice than to be an advocate for the MSMEs. You think about it, so I believe that there are two types of people, or each of us, we have two minds. There's a mind that thinks about, I always say to people, I'm like, you have to think about it as, you have to be selfless enough to see the problems other people are encountering. Either you deploying some form of empathy, whatever that is. But you then become a bit selfish enough to also see that, if you do not solve that problem, it may affect you. I mean, this is how like the basic even enterprise or entrepreneurs even think, right? That what's the problem everyone is facing? And sometimes it's from a place of, I just want to make money. And then you are selfless enough to do the research. You say, what are they really facing? Then you empathize, right? You go to the depth of it. And then you become selfish enough to say, okay, how do I monetize this? And then but in the case of advocacy, you're thinking about it from a place of, how do I translate what this woman is going through? How do I translate it to decision makers? Because they will never be in those rooms. There was a time a Continental organization did an event, and then they had engaged a top consulting firm, and then those ones had called out for attendees, right? Okay, thank you, Godwin. So they had called out for attendees, right? And then what had happened from there was, it was supposed to be an MSME discourse. And then when I looked in the room, no one was running an MSME. I mean, we can say, okay, yes, my business and all, but we're discussing commodities. We're discussing certain types of, I mean, things that should actually involve like the actual buyer and sellers, the actual traders, but they were not in the room. I mean, these are real issues, right? These are even things that have to do with like soft infrastructure. And then so if you are going to even advocate for things like power supply, if you're going to advocate for things like security issues across the borders, if you're going to advocate for things like even the logistics, right? Logistics companies also have their own issues. But interestingly, some of them belong to organizations or associations that are able to advocate for them. But if you're going to advocate for these infrastructural problems that our MSMEs are facing, I think it's important for us to, as much as possible, get into the right rooms and as much as possible, capture the pain points they are complaining about. So I hope at the end of all of this, we all believe, I mean, this is me wrapping up my debate and saying, oh, I hope I've not been able to confuse you and I'm able to convince you. But I hope we all leave here becoming advocates, right? But that would be all from me. I didn't come here to what's the word now? To tell you, oh, these are the, because Nozipo has done fantastic justice to that, right? She's done an amazing work when it comes to like helping you to understand the provisions. But it is up to us now to carry the baton, and these are practical ways we can do it. Thank you very much for having me, Busola. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. No, that was very detailed. And I think even for someone who is not running like MSME, I have like a very good idea of what we should be doing to advocate. Like for us at InfraSpotlight, like we look at infrastructure deficits more at a very high level, not just for MSMEs. We believe that everybody needs quality infrastructure. But this is just how we can all be thinking about it. Because without MSMEs, we don't have stable economy. Like Alice also said, we wouldn't have like stable economy. And so if you think about the economic impact, then we should all be speaking up for traders, for MSMEs and all. I'm just going to ask everyone, if you have a question for this particular session or so far, please, we still have Alice, we still have Dolakbo, and I believe we still have Nozipo on the call. Please do raise your hand and ask them any questions. We have just about 3 minutes for this, and then we would wrap up. So if you have any questions, this is your chance to ask these questions. If you have any question, please do ask very quickly. Otherwise, I'm going to also put in the chat the workshop feedback form. We kindly ask everyone to please, all our participants, to please share your feedback of this session, of this workshop. This is how we can improve all of our future programs. So if you have any feedback for us for future programs, please do share your feedback. It takes about 5 minutes to complete the feedback form. So if we have any questions, please, before I hand over to the next person who will be doing the closing remarks.
So I think if no one has a question, it simply means they've all become advocates now, and we can rely on them to do the work alongside us.
I think that would be the outcome that we really want, for everybody to be advocates. Please join all of us in the work that we do, from AfCFTA dialogues to Trade Flow Africa to InfraSpotlight. Please, we can't push this work by ourselves. So we definitely need more people to be speaking, more people to be engaged, more people to be involved. So like I said, I have dropped the feedback form in the chat for us to fill. Please do take some time to fill. I'm also going to be sharing some of the resources that we have at InfraSpotlight that can help you. I think earlier on, Nozipo and also Dolapo, they've spoken about policy implementation. And one of the things that we do at InfraSpotlight is ensuring that people have access to the resources that they need to be informed, and also so that they can advocate better, or even to demand for better infrastructure. So we have our blog, we have a report on infrastructure financing specific for Nigeria, but we also have a repository of infrastructure policies across 28 African countries. So wherever you have joined from, we probably have a policy for your country. So if you can, please check our resources and also follow us on social media. That would be very great. So if there are no questions, I would like to call the chair of our Board of Trustees, Mary, to please give us the opening remark. But before then, I just want to say a very big thank you to everyone for joining. And it's been a really great pleasure to just have every one of you here. For those who joined from the start and those who joined in the middle, it's been a great pleasure to just have every one of you here. So over to you, Mary.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Mary. It's nice to meet you all. And it's a pleasure to be here today to partake in this enlightening session. It's also lovely to meet Nosifo, Dolapo, Alice, amongst all other facilitators as well as attendees. Today, I'm sure that we've all learned one or two things from the discussion we've had today. And again, thank you all for joining this dialogue on implementing AfCFTA infrastructure as a catalyst for seamless intra-African trade. I think one important thing that stood out for me today, and I'm sure that there's one or two things that must have stood out for each of us during this call, is that infrastructure, of course, is not just about road development. It goes beyond that, or any form of transportation. And it extends to how border control procedures can also be better, how documentation can be improved. It also extends to language as well, ensuring that the language barrier gap is being bridged. I think this discussion has also led us to examine the case study of the farm to go case, and sort of helped us to understand how a promising SME lost a vital contract, due to poor road condition and border inefficiency. A story that also mirrors the experience of so many people, so many traders across Africa. So the question here today is, how can, private sectors sort of how can they come into play to make sure that how can they make sure that infrastructure is being advanced? And I think one of the key things you mentioned was the fact that private sector can do this through PPP, that is the public-private partnerships, as well as policy alignments, and even private sector themselves investing in infrastructure development across Africa. And I think one thing we made mention of is that, we can't do this. We can't see infrastructure being a part of advancing the AfCFTA without the involvement of private sector. So private sector needs to be involved in this for this to happen, as well as the small medium enterprise also need to be part of this, because their role helps in advancing, infrastructure in Africa. I think a personal experience for me was when I was in uni. I think 2 years ago, when my mom wanted to, because my mom sells, she basically ships goods from Africa, that's Nigeria to be specific, and sells some of this in the United Kingdom. And I think I was in uni when she called me and told me that the goods that she had shipped, I think worth thousands of pounds, was seized by custom. And as at then, I was schooling, and then what came to mind for me is, how could I have helped my mom? I'm a lawyer. I was on my master's degree program as at then. Like, how could I have helped my mom? What way could I have advised her better to ensure that situation that she found herself in, could not, like, maybe if, for example, she shouldn't have experienced such. But that's even a trade between Africa and Europe. That is, I think, inter-African trade. And it comes to mind to me that whatever might have caused the delay of our goods being shipped, because that goods was shipped between Africa, sort of impacted her, of course, her business, and maybe in one way or the other, how she views, the business itself growing in the nearest future. So I think in one way or the other, this discussion we've had today shapes whether ourselves or a neighbor close to us, or just any maybe even family and friends around us. So Africa trade is important, and it's I'm just imagining if trade that we've been discussing today, we're talking about AfCFTA that is most likely within, of course, Africa. That is Africa trade within Africa, right? Inter-African trade. And for my mom's case, as was, the trade extended beyond Africa. So what comes to mind to me is if a trade outside Africa can be like that, how much more challenge is a trade within Africa going to be difficult? That is in the case of Kizito, that, for example, the case study that we've just examined. So I think we should go out of this discussion with a mind that AfCFTA, the implementation, infrastructure as as an important factor in advancing AfCFTA affects each and every one of us, affects the neighbor close to you, affects me. And we should leave this call knowing fully well that we're not just hearers or listening to this conversation, but we know that in one way or the other, we can better help in advocacy, in even participating in sessions like this to advise our next door neighbor, to better understand the implications of, not just the implementation of the AfCFTA, but trade in general. So again, it's been a lovely conversation we've had today, and I believe that in one way or the other, trade affects you and I. So let's keep coming to hear from experienced people on the field, and also see how in one way or the other we can also advocate for what's it called, for advancing trade both within Africa and also outside Africa. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you very, very much for that amazing closing remark. So yes, we've come to the end of this workshop. If you are in a place where you can turn on your camera, I think this would be a very good time for us to see you and connect the dot between your name and your face. But yes, I just want to say a very big thank you again to our facilitators, to our speakers, and to you, the participants. We hope to see you in our future programs, and we hope to also see you engaged beyond just our programs, that you would engage with the great work that we're doing. So it's goodbye from us and see you soon. Don't forget to fill in the workshop feedback form. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.